The wind along the coast always carried a song, whether one wanted to hear it or not. Some mornings it sang of calm tides and gentle promises. Other days, it moaned of storms to come. For Kemi, it had long since become a familiar voice, one that offered more comfort than most human tongues. She was a thin girl of 16, her limbs lean from work and hunger, her skin bronzed from days spent beneath the open sky. Her hair, once a shining black cascade, now hung in rough, tangled waves, often streaked with salt from the sea air. Yet in her dark eyes burned a depth that others failed to see, an unspoken knowing shaped by grief and longing. Her home was a small, crumbling hut on the edge of the fishing village of Umyaba. The village itself lay nestled between high cliffs and the endless stretch of sea. Once prosperous, Umyaba now belonged to merchants and landholders, while families like Kemi's barely scraped by. Her father had been a fisherman, one of the finest, people used to say. His nets always seemed to return fuller than most, as if the sea favored him. But then came the great storm nearly 2 years ago now, a savage tempest that swallowed boats whole. Kemi's father had not returned. With him had gone their livelihood, their standing, and the fragile security of their days. Her mother fell ill from grief and weariness, and now spent most of her time inside, frail and silent. Kemi alone worked the small plot of land they still owned, gathering driftwood, mending torn nets for neighbors, and foraging among the tide pools when the sea permitted. She was no one's apprentice, no merchant's daughter. Just the orphan girl with ragged clothes, tired hands, and too much sorrow. It was no wonder, perhaps, that the others in the village began to look at her strangely. But the sea at least did not judge. Every morning before dawn, before the fishermen set out and the market stalls stirred to life, Kemi would walk down to the shoreline. There, where the wet sand lay cool and smooth beneath her feet, she would kneel. With her finger, or sometimes with a stick she carried, she would write. Words poured from her like water from a cracked jar. Her grief for her father, her fears for her mother, her hunger, her loneliness, her helpless anger at the life that seemed to shrink around her. The sentences varied. Some long and desperate, others simple and aching. Why did you leave me, Papa? Or how will I feed her tomorrow? Or simply I am so tired. When the tide rose and washed her words away, some small weight lifted from her heart. It was not magic, not a true answer, but it was a kind of release. The sea heard her if no one else did. She had done this for many months, quietly, when no one was about. But recently others had noticed. Fisherfolk rising early, merchants' sons seeking shells, idle women gossiping along the cliffs. Whispers began. That girl again, they said. The one who writes nonsense to the waves. As if the ocean could care for her troubles. As if scribbling in the sand could change a thing. Children began to mimic her, drawing crude shapes in the dirt and laughing. Some women muttered that it was unnatural, that she courted bad spirits, or sought to curse the sea that had taken her father. The old priestess warned her once, gently, to be careful with what one whispered to the tides. But Kemi did not stop. She could not. There were nights when the hunger gnawed too fiercely, when her mother's shallow breath seemed too thin, when she feared she might break apart. The sand was her only place to speak, to breathe, to hope. One gray morning, long before the sun had burned off the mists, she made her way to the shore once more. The beach stretched long and empty before her, the sea calm for now, lapping in slow rhythm. Her feet left soft impressions behind her as she walked. She knelt and began to write. I'm tired. I have no bread today. Mama is weaker. I do not know what to do. Please, help me. The words scrawled in shaky lines, uneven with her trembling hand. She pressed her palm into the cool sand as if to steady her heart. Behind her, faint voices stirred. Footsteps crunching on the drier stones. Kemi froze, but it was too late. Well, look at this, a sharp voice rang out. Kemi turned to see 3 girls from the village standing a few paces away. Daughters of a wealthy merchant, always dressed in fine wraps, hair oiled and braided, eyes quick with mockery. One of them, Mabwa, was the loudest, her smile thin as a knife. The little sand which writes again, Mabwa said, her companions giggling behind her. What do you think, girls? Should we read her poetry? Before Kemi could rise or erase her words, Mabwa darted forward, scanning the lines. Her voice rose, mocking. I am tired. I have no bread. Oh, poor thing. No bread today? Maybe the sea will serve you a feast. Laughter echoed. Kemi's cheeks burned. Another girl chimed in. Or perhaps her ghost father will rise from the waves with a golden net. Such nonsense. Mabwa stepped closer, looming over Kemi. Truly pitiful. Talking to the sea? You should beg like a proper wretch. Kemi bit her lip, tears stinging her eyes. But she would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her weep. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Oh, we understand," Mabwa said with a sneer. "We understand that you're mad." With that, they turned and sauntered away, their laughter trailing behind them. Kemi knelt alone, the shame of it burning through her ribs. The sea whispered at her feet, its calm voice uncaring. Slowly she wiped away her words and rose. The morning tide would come soon. The waves would erase what little remained. But the ache in her heart stayed, heavier than ever. That afternoon, when she passed through the market square with a small basket of driftwood, other glances followed her, curious, cruel, or pitying. More whispers chased her steps. She kept her head down. Her coins were few, her needs were many. No merchant offered her favor. No neighbor shared their bounty. The poor orphan girl who talked to waves, what help could she expect? As the sun lowered toward the horizon, Kemi returned to her hut. Her mother lay still, her breath faint. Kemi touched her forehead, whispered words of comfort though she knew they might not reach her. When the stars began to prick the sky, Kemi sat alone outside, gazing toward the dark line of the sea. "Will you hear me again?" she murmured. "Or, is it foolish to hope?" The wind offered no reply. But in her heart, something stirred, a faint echo of longing not yet silenced. Tomorrow she would return to the sand. She must. Because even if the world mocked her, the sea listened. And somehow, that was enough to carry her through one more day. The sun had barely risen when Kemi made her way down to the shore, the familiar path worn smooth beneath her bare feet. The morning was crisp, a faint mist hanging over the sea like a soft veil. The village still slumbered, fishermen only just beginning to haul their nets and the market stalls standing silent and empty. This was her favorite time, before the world awoke, before voices could sting and gazes could weigh her down. The shoreline stretched empty, the sand cool beneath her soles. She breathed deeply of the salt air and knelt at the edge of the tide. Her hands moved swiftly as if guided by her heart. Words spilled into the smooth sand. "Father, it is hard today. Mama grows weaker. The bread is gone. The neighbors turn their backs. I do not know how to hope anymore." She pressed her fingers deeper, tracing each line carefully. The act of writing steadied her, slowed her breathing. Here she could speak her truth, even if only the waves would listen. But the moment of peace was not to last. A sudden burst of laughter echoed down from the stone steps that led from the cliffs to the beach. Kemi stiffened, her heart lurching. Footsteps followed, quick, light, and unkind. "Well, well," a sharp voice rang out. "Look what the tide dragged in." Kemi turned, dread pooling in her stomach. 3 girls stood a short distance away, dressed in fine wraps of soft linen, their braids gleaming with oil and beads. It was Mabwa again, flanked by her companions, Lami and Sefa, daughters of the wealthiest spice merchant in the village. They had tormented Kemi before with idle taunts and sly whispers, but this morning their eyes glittered with fresh mischief. "She's writing again," Lami said with a sneer. "To her precious sea spirits." Sefa snickered. "Or perhaps she thinks the fish will read her tales of woe." Mabwa sauntered closer, her sandals kicking up sand. "Come now, let us see what our little orphan poet has to say." Kemi's pulse raced. She scrambled to brush away her words, but Mabwa was faster. With a swift step, she blocked Kemi's hand and bent down, eyes gleaming. "Oh, this is rich," Mabwa crowed. "Mama grows weaker. Neighbors turn their backs. I do not know how to hope. Poor thing. No hope left. Shall we cry for her, girls?" Laughter burst from her companions, sharp and cruel. Kemi's cheeks burned. She stood, fists clenched at her sides, but her voice caught in her throat. "Leave me be," she managed, though her voice trembled. Mabwa smirked. "What? This is the best entertainment we've had all week." She turned to her friends. "Truly, what would we do without our tragic beach writer? Shall we fetch a scribe to record her wisdom?" More laughter. Kemi's breath quickened, shame prickling over her skin. A deeper voice joined the mockery. "What's this commotion?" Turning, the girls parted to reveal Dara, the merchant's son, tall, broad-shouldered, and smug. The young man strode forward, a fine embroidered tunic draped over his frame, gold bracelets flashing on his wrists. Lami giggled. "Only our little poetess, Dara?" Mabwa tilted her head. "She writes such sorrowful lines, you'd think she owned the sea with all her complaints." Dara eyed Kemi with amused disdain. "Still talking to the waves, are you? No wonder no one wants to marry you. You'll curse any house that takes you in." A fresh wave of laughter rolled through the group. Kemi's throat tightened. The words cut deeper than they should have. She'd long accepted her place, alone, overlooked, but hearing it flung so publicly was too much. She backed away a step, her heart pounding. Dara grinned wider. "Run along, little mouse. Or better yet, stay. The sea might pity you enough to toss you a coin." Something inside Kemi snapped. Tears welled despite her efforts to fight them. The shame, the hunger, the sleepless nights, all of it boiled over. Without another word, she turned and fled, her feet slipping on the wet sand. Behind her, the laughter rang louder. She didn't stop until she reached the cliffs, heart hammering, breath ragged. There, hidden among the rocks, she crumpled to the ground. The sobs came then, raw, aching, unstoppable. She hated them, hated giving her tormentors the power to wound her so deeply. But the pain was too sharp. "I only wanted to be heard," she whispered through her tears. "To hope." But the world did not care. The villagers had long made their judgment. The merchant's son, the fine daughters, they would always walk above her. And what could she do, a girl with nothing but a crumbling hut and a mother who grew weaker each day? The sea murmured below, indifferent. The tide rose, swallowing her words from the sand as it always did. Yet even as the tears slowed, a faint stubbornness stirred beneath her grief. She could not stop coming here. Could not stop writing. Because if she did, if she gave up even this small act, what would she have left? Wiping her face, Kemi forced herself to stand. The sun climbed higher now, the village waking fully. She could not return to the beach yet, not while their mocking voices might linger. But tomorrow she would come again. Because even if no one else believed, the sea still listened. And one day, perhaps one day, it would answer. By the time the village stirred to full life that morning, Kemi had already retreated to the farthest edge of the beach, away from the market square and the eyes of the merchants. Her heart still ached from the cruel taunts earlier. The sharp laughter of Mabwa and her friends echoed in her mind, mingling with Dara's sneer. She carried her empty basket under one arm, pretending to search among the rocks for driftwood or small shellfish, but her spirit was low. The shame, the helplessness, it was heavier than hunger itself. Clouds had gathered over the sea by afternoon, a veil of silver mist softening the horizon. The beach was quieter now, the fishermen at their boats, the market humming further inland. Kemi welcomed the solitude. She wandered farther than usual, beyond the village's well-trodden paths, to a small crescent of shore nestled between two cliffs. The sand here was untouched, save for the ripples left by the retreating tide. She dropped her basket and sat by the water's edge, hugging her knees. No words today. No writing. Her hope felt too thin, her chest too tight. She simply watched the waves roll in and out, slow and steady, as if the sea itself breathed in rhythm. "Not many come this far alone," a voice said behind her. Kemi started, twisting around. An old man stood a few paces away. He wore a broad, woven hat and a long cloak of faded indigo, patched in places but clean. A walking staff rested in his hand. His face was lined and tanned, his beard silver, but his dark eyes were keen and gentle. Kemi tensed instinctively, ready to flee, but the man made no move toward her. He remained where he was, gaze calm. "I did not mean to startle you," he said softly. "Forgive me." She hesitated, then shook her head. "It's nothing." For a moment, the man said nothing more. He looked out at the sea. "You come here often," he observed, voice mild. Kemi flushed, lowering her gaze. I do. To write," he added. "In the sand." Her heart leapt. So he had seen. She braced for mockery, another cruel word, another insult. But none came. Instead, the old man smiled gently. "It is a good thing, child. To speak your heart to the sea." She blinked, confused. "But they say it is foolish. They are wrong." He moved closer now, seating himself upon a flat rock nearby. "The sea listens more than men do. It remembers." Kemi studied him, curiosity stirring through her sorrow. "How do you know?" The man chuckled softly, a sound like waves lapping on stone. "I have traveled far, to ports and isles beyond this coast. The sea is an old friend to those who respect her. She carries sorrows and hopes alike." He reached into the folds of his cloak and drew out a small pouch. From it, he produced a delicate necklace, a simple string of woven cord from which hung a pale, spiral shell. "I would give you this," he said, holding it out. Kemi hesitated, eyes wide. "Why?" "It is a token," he replied. "Not of wealth but of faith. Wear it when you write. And listen." Still unsure, Kemi reached out and accepted the necklace. The shell was smooth and cool beneath her fingers. Thank you," she murmured. The old man rose, leaning on his staff. "Do not lose hope, little one. The sea hears more than you know." He tipped his hat in farewell and turned, striding away down the beach, his figure soon swallowed by the mist. Kemi sat frozen, the necklace resting in her palm. No one had ever spoken such kindness to her, not in many long months. Certainly not a stranger. She slipped the cord over her head. The shell hung just below her collarbone, cool against her skin. The mist thickened as the afternoon waned. Kemi finally gathered her basket and returned home, the old man's words echoing in her mind. That night, sleep came slowly. Her mother's shallow breathing filled the small hut. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but a strange warmth lingered in her heart. When at last her eyes closed, dreams rose to meet her. She stood upon a vast, moonlit shore, the sea gleaming silver beneath a starless sky. The waves whispered, soft, sibilant, calling her name. Kemi? Kemi? She stepped forward, bare feet sinking into cool, wet sand. The tide surged and retreated, shimmering with faint golden light. Kemi? The voice seemed to come from everywhere, the sea, the sky, the earth. Not mocking, not cruel, welcoming. She reached down and traced her fingers in the sand. I am here, she wrote. The waves answered with a gentle sigh. And in that moment, her heart lifted, not with certainty, but with the faintest stirrings of hope. The sky was still dark when Kemi rose from her mat, the thin blanket falling from her shoulders. The night's dreams clung to her, the whispering waves, the shimmer of moonlight on a silver sea. She touched the shell at her throat, its surface cool against her skin. In the dim light of dawn, her mother lay silent, her breathing shallow but steady. Kemi brushed a gentle hand across her brow, then wrapped her shawl tightly and stepped out into the chill morning air. The village streets were hushed. No one stirred yet among the shuttered stalls and worn doorways. The mist off the sea drifted low through the alleys, soft and pale. Kemi's feet found the familiar path, worn smooth by her many walks to the shore. Stones gave way to sand as the cliffs opened before her. The sea stretched vast and gray beneath the paling sky, its waves slow and steady. She paused at the edge of the beach, heart beating fast. Would the girls return today? Would Dara or his father's men see her? Yet something deeper stirred in her, the need to write, to unburden herself. Her gaze lifted toward the far rocks, but the shore lay empty. Only the sea greeted her, calm and vast. Kemi stepped forward, her toes sinking into the cool sand. The tide had retreated, leaving a broad stretch of wet earth smooth as a slate. She knelt and began. The words poured from her fingers, faster than thought. Hunger grips me. There is no bread. Mama fades more each day. They mock me, call me cursed. I'm so tired, so alone. If any spirit hears me, show me a way. Please. I do not know how to hope. Her breath trembled as she wrote, the ache in her chest loosening with each line. Tears gathered in her eyes, falling unheeded to the sand. She pressed her palm to the earth as if to drive the words deeper. I do not know how to hope, she whispered aloud. But I still ask. For a long while she knelt there, silent but for the sea's soft murmurs. Then slowly she rose. The tide would come. The waves would erase her sorrow. But perhaps they would carry her words somewhere. Perhaps the old traveler had spoken true. Kemi turned to leave, wiping her face with her sleeve. A sudden shimmer caught her eye. She froze. Out beyond the line of foam, a faint gleam traced the surface of the water, not the flat reflection of dawn but something else. A pulse of light, soft and golden, moving with the waves. Her breath caught. The shimmer drifted closer, then faded, as if drawn back beneath the depths. For a long moment Kemi stared, heart pounding. Had she imagined it? A trick of light upon the waves? Or something more? She stepped forward, the cold water lapping her ankles. But the sea gave no further sign. Only its steady breath, its ancient voice. Kemi stood there as the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, her heart filled with wonder, with questions. And for the first time in many weeks, the faintest thread of hope stirred within her. The wind had changed. Kemi could feel it the moment she stepped out into the pale morning light. It was crisp and cool, carrying with it a new scent, something sharp, tinged with salt and a faint metallic tang. The sky overhead gleamed cloudless and clear, the kind of bright blue that promised a fine day. Yet there was an odd charge in the air, as though the earth itself held its breath. Kemi's own breath quickened as she wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and hurried down the narrow lane that led to the sea. All through the restless hours of the night, her thoughts had turned again and again to that strange shimmer on the waves. It had danced in her dreams, a ripple of gold that teased the edge of her mind, always just out of reach. By the time she reached the cliffs, the tide had begun to rise. The waves rolled in, higher and stronger than the morning before, the foam glistening as it lapped against the sand. The sea was alive today, not angry but vibrant, as if it too had something to say. Kemi's feet carried her swiftly across the beach, down to the place where she always wrote. But this morning she carried no words in her mind, only questions. She paused at the edge of the water, uncertain. Then her eyes caught something gleaming in the wet sand. She blinked. There, tangled among strands of seaweed and bits of driftwood, lay a small, shining object. A coin, bright gold, its edges softened by the tide. Kemi gasped. She dropped to her knees and brushed away the sand. Another coin. And another. Scattered pieces of gold, half buried among the foam and shells. Her fingers trembled as she gathered them. They were not copper or dull brass but real gold, heavy and warm in her palm. Her heart pounded. How could this be? She scanned the shoreline. More glints caught her eye, small rings, a broken chain, what looked like the curved hilt of an old dagger gleaming faintly beneath a layer of sand. Her breath came in short gasps. The sea had answered. The words she had poured into the earth, her hunger, her sorrow, her plea for hope, somehow, impossibly, they had been heard. And the ocean had returned her pain in gold. Kemi's mind raced. Could this be a trick? A shipwreck from some forgotten vessel? A buried hoard stirred loose by the tide? But the place was too remote, too far from the merchant's docks or the usual fishing grounds. No one else ever came this far. No other footprints marked the sand but hers. Still, the risk was great. If anyone saw her here, gathering treasure from the sea, the jealous tongues of the village would turn crueler still. Worse, someone might accuse her of thievery, or worse, sorcery. The stories of how quickly envy could turn to rage filled her memory. She had seen it happen before to others less fortunate. With shaking hands she gathered the scattered coins and trinkets into the folds of her shawl. Her heart pounded with every glance over her shoulder, every whisper of the wind. The village was still stirring, the market not yet opened, but time was short. Kemi rose, her bundle clutched tightly to her chest, and hurried back across the sand. Her bare feet barely touched the ground as she darted between the rocks and up the narrow path that led toward the cliffs. There, hidden among the tall grasses, she found a small hollow beneath a leaning boulder, a place her father had once used to hide extra fishing nets. Carefully she stashed the gold there, covering it with stones and seaweed. Only the small shell necklace remained around her throat, its pale spiral cool against her skin. Her breath shuddered out of her. What now? For the first time in so long, the ache of hunger no longer pressed so sharply against her ribs. She could buy bread. No, not just bread, but enough food to sustain her and her mother for weeks. She could repair the leaking roof of their hut, replace her mother's thin blanket, perhaps even buy herbs to ease her mother's breath. And yet, fear knotted her stomach. If she spent the gold openly, questions would come. Dara and Mabel would notice. The merchant's watchful eyes would fall on her. No, she must be careful. For now she would wait. Gather more if it came. Hide it well. Let no one suspect. Still her heart sang. The sea had answered. That afternoon, beneath the bright sun, Kemi sat quietly beside her mother, spooning thin broth between her lips. The older woman stirred faintly, a whisper of color returning to her cheeks. Kemi smiled through her tears. Later, as the stars brightened above the quiet village, Kemi knelt beside her mat and whispered into the darkness. Thank you. The sea murmured in the distance, the voice of the waves steady and sure. And deep within her, hope began to bloom once more. For a few days, Kemi moved quietly through the village, her steps careful, her eyes lowered. The gold remained hidden in the hollow by the cliffs, wrapped safely in woven cloth. She had not dared spend any yet, not openly. Only a few small coins had she taken to the market, trading them for bread and a little millet flour. Enough to feed her mother well for the first time in weeks. Enough to bring a little color back to her cheeks. And at first no one seemed to notice. But Umuba was a place where no secret stayed hidden for long. It began with small things, curious glances from the market women when Kemi handed over her coins, a murmur behind her back as she passed through the narrow streets. Strange, isn't it? One voice whispered. The girl had nothing at all, and now suddenly she buys bread and flour with silver. Silver? I heard it was gold, another replied. Kemi heard these murmurs and quickened her steps. She spent only what she must, always returning to the sea at dawn and dusk, seeking the quiet comfort of the waves. There she still wrote, careful words, grateful words, questions she dared not ask aloud. Is this a blessing or a test? What am I to do? The waves offered no answer she could understand. But still she came. It might have remained a small curiosity, a passing bit of gossip, if not for Mabwa. Mabwa, sharp-eyed and hungry for scandal, noticed everything. It was she who first told Dara. "I saw her," Mabwa said one morning, lounging beside Dara beneath the shade of a fig tree. "She bought fresh bread yesterday, and not the stale ends the baker gives to beggars. Real bread. And her mother has new herbs from the healer." Dara's eyes narrowed. "With what coin?" Mabwa smirked. "Gold, they say. From the sea." Dara snorted. "Ridiculous." "Perhaps." Mabwa's voice was sly. "But who knows what tricks an orphan might try? The old women whisper that she writes spells in the sand." "Spells?" Dara laughed harshly. "Nonsense." But the thought lodged in his mind. That afternoon, he watched Kemi from a distance as she passed through the market, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. She bought a small bundle of dried fish and a clay pot. Her steps were quick, her gaze lowered, but her coins gleamed briefly in the sunlight as she handed them over. Gold. Dara's jaw tightened. He was the son of one of the wealthiest merchants in the village, yet he had noticed the tightening of trade, the growing competition. Times were leaner now even for the prosperous. If this little beggar girl had found some secret source of wealth, well, it would not stand. By the next day the whispers had grown louder. "They say she speaks to spirits," one man muttered by the docks. "The sea spirits," another replied darkly. "And it answers her." "Witchery," someone spat. Kemi felt the change as soon as she entered the market square. Eyes followed her more openly now, sharp, suspicious, greedy. Conversations hushed when she passed. Children stared. Women drew back slightly as if her presence might stain them. Her chest tightened. She bought what she needed quickly and fled back to her hut. At home, her mother looked stronger each day, though still frail. Kemi smiled and fed her, hiding her own fear behind gentle words. But inside, dread gnawed at her. If the rumors grew, if envy turned to anger, she could lose everything. The little gold she had gathered, her fragile place in the village, even her safety. That evening, as the sun sank low, she hurried once more to the hidden hollow by the cliffs. Her fingers brushed the cloth-wrapped bundle, checking that it remained untouched. Her thoughts swirled. Could she move it? Bury it elsewhere? But where would be safer than here? The waves whispered below, steady and calm. Kemi knelt by the shore, tracing hesitant words into the sand. "I'm afraid. They know. What should I do?" She pressed her palm to the earth as though the sea itself might answer. Behind her, the wind carried faint voices. Laughter, footsteps too near. She fled before she could be seen. That night, as she lay beside her mother, she could not sleep. The shell at her throat felt heavy. The sea had answered her sorrow with gold. But now the weight of that gift threatened to crush her. The days that followed were uneasy. The village hummed with low voices and sidelong glances. Kemi moved through the narrow lanes with increasing caution, each footstep measured. The gold in the hollow by the cliffs seemed to grow heavier in her mind, as though its very presence now glowed through the earth for all to sense. In the market square, talk spread faster than fire through dry brush. "I heard her mother has new clothes." And a clay stove was seen at their door, new. "From where? No one hires her. No one gives her charity." "Spirits," someone whispered darkly. "The sea spirits feed her." But not everyone spoke of spirits. Dar had spent several days watching Kemi with sharp, calculating eyes. Each time she passed, his gaze followed her. At first with idle curiosity, but as the days wore on, with a harder edge, suspicion and greed coiling beneath the surface. Then one morning the rumor came to him through one of his father's hired guards. An old fisherman says a chest of gold was lost off the coast years ago, a merchant shipwrecked in a storm. The waves might have carried it ashore. Dara's heart leapt. Treasure, and the orphan girl was spending gold. Could not be coincidence. He rose from his father's great house with a cold purpose. That same afternoon, the square was crowded when Dara strode into its center, flanked by 2 guards in merchant livery. "Kemi," his voice rang out loud and commanding. Villagers turned, curious. Kemi froze mid-step, a basket of herbs balanced on her hip. Her pulse quickened. Every face now turned to her. "You have stolen from my family," Dara said coldly, pointing at her. "Gold that belongs to us." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I have not." Kemi managed, though her voice shook. Dara sneered. "Then where do you find such coins? You, a beggar with no trade?" The villagers watched, uneasy, hungry for drama. A few nodded. Others frowned. "It is not yours," Kemi whispered. "I have stolen nothing." But Dara's voice rose, Lies? There is treasure lost at sea, treasure that was meant for my father's ships. You found it? You hide it. The guard stepped forward, one gripping a cudgel. Fear gripped Kemi. Her breath came in short gasps. The basket slipped from her arms, herbs spilling across the ground. You will answer for this before the council, Dara declared. You will confess. He turned sharply, calling to one of the elders who stood nearby. Summon the council. Let her stand before them. The old man hesitated, troubled, but Dara's father was powerful, and the council would not ignore such a charge. Word spread swiftly. By sunset, the square buzzed with talk. Kemi's name passed from mouth to mouth. She is a thief. She bewitched the sea. She will bring ruin upon us. In her small hut, Kemi sat trembling beside her mother's mat. Her heart felt raw, her stomach hollow with dread. The gold remained hidden, but now even that seemed a curse. She had no champion, no voice. Her mother stirred weakly. Child, what troubles you? Kemi swallowed her fear. Nothing, Mama. Rest. But inside, terror bloomed. The council would demand answers. Dara would press his claim. The villagers' eyes were turning cold. If she lost this, if they judged her guilty, all would be lost. Worse than lost. The council's punishments could be severe for those who defied a merchant family. She touched the shell at her throat, cold against her skin. What should I do? She thought, tears welling. Help me. Outside, the waves whispered on the distant shore. And in the night, fear gripped her so tightly that she could not sleep. The morning of the hearing dawned with a restless wind. The skies, once clear, had turned a deep, brooding gray. Clouds rolled in from the sea, heavy with unseen weight, their edges tinged with an odd, silvery glow. The village seemed to hold its breath. Kemi awoke long before dawn. Sleep had eluded her, chased away by fear and uncertainty. In the dim hut, her mother lay quietly, unaware of what the day would bring. Kemi knelt beside her, tears wetting her lashes, and whispered a soft farewell, unsure if she would return by nightfall. She dressed in her simplest tunic and shawl. Around her neck she fastened the small shell necklace, its spiral gleaming faintly in the dim light. It seemed to thrum faintly with some hidden life, its cool surface steady against her pounding heart. As the sun began to rise, a small crowd gathered in the central square, the word having spread through every corner of Unyaba. Farmers, merchants, fishermen, even the children, all came to witness what was being called the trial of the orphan girl and the merchant's son. Dara stood tall near the council dais, flanked by his father's guards. His lips curled in triumph as he watched Kemi approach, her steps small but steady. His voice rang out. Here she is, the thief who steals from my family. Let her face judgment. The 5 elders of the village council sat upon carved wooden seats, their faces grave. Old men with long memories and wary eyes. They motioned Kemi forward. She knelt, trembling, the shell clutched tightly beneath her shawl. One elder spoke first. Child, you stand accused of theft. Of taking treasure not yours, hidden by fate. What say you? Kemi's voice shook, but she forced the words out. I have stolen nothing. I wrote my sorrow to the sea. The sea answered. A wave of murmurs passed through the crowd. The elders exchanged glances. Dara's voice cut through. Lies? She consorts with spirits, with darkness. It is gold she craves. The sea belongs to all, not to her. A heavier silence followed, expectant. The elders seemed uncertain. Then, from the cliffs beyond the square, a low, distant rumble sounded, a deep, thrumming note that echoed through the air. The crowd turned as one. From the sea came a sudden rising roar. The waves surged, higher than any had seen in many seasons, a single great swell building rolling toward the shore. Before any could move, the wave crashed against the rocks and surged up the beach with a thunderous roar. Foam and sea spray flew high into the air. And when the water receded, gasps broke from the gathered crowd. There on the sand, scattered in gleaming arcs, lay fresh gold coins and small trinkets, bright and wet, glittering beneath the gray sky. More than Kemi had ever seen. The square fell utterly silent. Kemi, eyes wide, rose slowly and stepped forward. Her bare feet brushed the damp sand, the necklace at her throat glowing faintly now as though in answer. From the edge of the crowd, a voice spoke. The sea speaks. All turned to see a tall figure striding forward. The old traveler, his cloak rippling in the salt breeze, the staff in his hand glowing faintly. Gasps rose. It is him, the stranger, the one who gave her the shell. He stopped beside Kemi, his eyes calm and deep as the ocean itself. I am no mere wanderer, he said quietly. I serve the will of the sea. The girl spoke her truth upon these sands. The sea answered, not in shadows but in light. He gestured toward the gleaming gold at Kemi's feet. She took nothing. The sea gave freely in answer to her sorrow. The elders leaned forward, their eyes wide. Dara's face burned crimson. He stammered, This is a trick. You seek to deceive us. But even the guards looked uncertain now, their grips loosening on their weapons. The traveler met Dara's gaze without fear. Greed blinds you, merchant's son. You covet what was not yours to claim. A heavy stillness followed, broken only by the sigh of the waves. At last the eldest councilman rose, his voice solemn. The sea has spoken. This child is no thief. The crowd stirred, voices rising in awe and wonder. Kemi stood frozen, the shell warm against her skin, her heart thundering. Somehow, impossibly, the ocean had answered. And her life would never be the same again. A hush hung over the square. The waves had receded, leaving gleaming trails of gold upon the damp sand. The old traveler stood tall beside Kemi, staff planted firmly in the earth. The gathered villagers stared, wide-eyed and breathless, as though waking from a strange dream. Slowly the elder of the council spoke again, voice ringing clear. The sea has given its answer. The girl spoke with a heart of sorrow, not greed. And the ocean answered her plea. A ripple passed through the crowd, a low murmur of awe and shame. Those who had once mocked Kemi now glanced away, avoiding her gaze. The market women, the fishmongers, even the children watched her as though seeing her for the first time. Dara stood stiff and pale, fury flashing in his eyes. But beside him, his father's guards looked uneasy, shifting their weight and casting furtive glances toward the elders. The traveler's voice was calm but firm. This gold was not stolen. It is a gift, earned by a heart that asked for hope. Let none claim otherwise. He turned to Kemi and placed a weathered hand upon her shoulder. His eyes, deep as the sea, met hers. Fear no longer, child. Kemi's throat tightened, her heart trembling with the weight of the moment. She opened her mouth to speak, but words would not come, only tears welled in her eyes. The eldest councilman nodded solemnly. So let it be known, the sea has judged. The gold is hers by right. Let no hand be raised against her. Across the square, voices rose in agreement, cautious but sincere. Dara, seeing the tide turn against him, clenched his fists. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but his father stepped forward with a sharp glance. It is done, the elder merchant said, his voice hard with reluctant acceptance. He cast a cold look at his son. Be silent. Dara's face burned with humiliation, and he fell back among the crowd, his pride wounded before all. Kemi, still trembling, bowed low before the council, her voice at last finding strength. Thank you, for hearing the truth. The old traveler smiled softly, his gaze kind. As the villagers began to disperse, murmuring among themselves, something had shifted. No longer did they look at Kemi as the pitiful orphan. The girl who had once been scorned and whispered about now stood in a new light, one touched by mystery and by grace. Children peeked shyly at her from behind their mothers. The old baker nodded at her with a newfound respect. Even Mabwa, who had once spread the cruelest gossip, now lowered her eyes when Kemi passed. The tide had turned. Later that day, when the crowd had thinned, Kemi gathered the gold from the sands beneath the watchful eyes of the traveler and the elders. They helped her count and store it safely in a strong chest. No one dared interfere. The old traveler placed the final coin in her hand, his voice low. Use it wisely, child. And remember, the sea does not forget. Kemi bowed her head, tears streaking her cheeks. I will. When she returned to her small hut that evening, chest in hand, her mother stirred awake, her voice faint. Kemi, what is this? With a trembling smile, Kemi knelt beside her and whispered, A gift, Mama. A gift from the sea. And outside, the waves whispered on the wind, their song soft and endless. The days that followed passed like a dream. Gone were the fearful glances and cruel whispers. When Kemi walked through the market now, heads nodded in greeting. Where once there had been laughter at her thin frame and ragged clothes, there were now quiet words of respect. She used the gold carefully. Not all at once, never in a way that would stir greed. First, she bought medicine for her mother, stronger herbs from the healer's finest stores. Then warm blankets and fresh food, fish, millet, sweet yams. Her mother's cheeks began to flush with life again, her voice growing stronger each day. But Kemi remembered what the traveler had said, use it wisely. She thought long and hard before spending more. When she did, it was to help others as well. A sack of grain left quietly at an old widow's door. A new fishing net purchased for a struggling fisherman. No boast, no claim, only quiet acts of kindness. Soon the villagers spoke of her with a different tone. Good-hearted girl. She remembers those who have little. She brings no shame to her gift. Even Dara, once so proud and bitter, now kept his distance. He dared not raise voice or hand against her, not after the sea had spoken so clearly. Each morning before the market stirred, Kemi still walked the path to the beach. The sand greeted her bare feet, cool and soft. There, in her familiar spot, she knelt as she always had. But now, the words she traced in the sand were not heavy with sorrow. They were words of thanks, of wonder, of hope. Thank you for life. Thank you for hope. May I be worthy of this gift. And sometimes, what future awaits me? The waves always whispered in reply. No clear words, no grand message, but a constant song, steady, endless, like breath. It filled her heart with peace. She kept the small shell necklace close. It reminded her of the old traveler, the spirit's messenger, and of the bond she now felt with the sea itself. And though she still lived simply, never seeking great wealth, the fear of hunger no longer haunted her dreams. Her mother grew stronger with each passing week. One morning when Kemi returned from the beach, she found her mother sitting upright by the hearth, smiling faintly. "The sea brought you back to me," her mother whispered. Kemi knelt beside her and clasped her hands. "No, Mama. The sea heard my heart." In time, her story became legend, told in soft voices by the fireside, passed down to children with wide eyes. "They say she wrote her pain in the sand," the storytellers would say, "and the sea returned it in gold." But to Kemi it was simpler than that. She still walked the shore each dawn. She still wrote in the sand. And each time the waves came to meet her words, she knew, the sea, forever faithful, would always whisper her name.